really a deja vu from last year, and I hope we can meet in person again in spring. Now, as Swedish representative in Germany, I have 7 years of experience working under a feminist government, conducting a feminist foreign policy. And I can say that the feminist foreign policy is now in the DNA of all the colleagues working in the foreign service. There was some hesitation at the start. People were not really sure what is this new animal. I served in New York. We were just starting the campaign to be elected in the Security Council. And I can tell you in all honesty that I think our competitors from the Netherlands and Italy thought, oh, excellent, the Swedes, they're doing it again. But I think we've proved them wrong. And we've engaged the whole foreign service, all embassies and the ministry to make it as concrete as possible. At the corner or at the bottom, we have the 3 R's, rights, representation, and resources. And without going into any detail, I can say I feel it's been very successful. I think with the panel, we'll probably show how, but alone the fact that we now have seven countries altogether running a feminist foreign policy speaks proof. We have Canada, France, Mexico, Luxembourg, Spain, and the newest member in our group is Libya. And of course, it goes without saying that we would warmly welcome Germany as well into this group. But since we have the architect behind the Swedish feminist foreign policy in the panel, I will not go into further detail, but we have identified 4 aspects that have been key to the success we feel we've had with the feminist foreign policy. The first one is leadership. It's been very clear from the Swedish government, from the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, but also all other ministers and state secretaries, that this is important and we take this very seriously. Second one is ownership. As I said, all embassies have been invited to contribute with their ideas. And I think it's been especially important to involve men in the formation of the feminist foreign policy. I've been in many panels in Germany as well, and the problem is that we almost always have 90 to 95% women. It's the men who need to hear the story. Third point is the steering. You have to you cannot run feminist foreign policy as a side activity. It has to be integrated in the regular planning process that goes both for the foreign service but for the government as a whole. And fourthly, support. We have a very small team in Stockholm, dedicated but small. So everybody really needs to help. Our communications department has been extremely useful. We've had focal points in all embassies. We've had ad hoc teams and so on. So I hope to be able to give you some more detail into the practical work when it comes to feminist foreign policy during the panel. But now look forward very much to exciting discussions with this very distinguished panel. And I now leave the screen over to you, Kristina, to give your words of welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Per. It is such an honor and pleasure for us to be doing this event series with the Swedish Embassy as one of our partners, where we should have been tonight, where we should have been celebrating tonight. First lovely panel, with people coming in from different parts of the world and with many people in the audience. I guess thanks to the pandemic, if one can say so, we have a couple of more people listening in and watching now, because the capacity would not have been as big under current restrictions at the embassy. So that is a plus side, if there's a plus side at all. But we're all missing so much coming together. And with this event series, so I will explain in a second what we're actually doing and what the summit is. And it was meant to take place in a year ago, 2020. So we had to postpone it already once. So we finally found a date today and tomorrow, the evening reception today and the full summit tomorrow. Then a few months ago, we made a decision to move it again to next year. And now even the reception cannot take place. So we're hanging in there. It will happen eventually. And I'll show you in a second with a few slides how exactly it will happen. But I guess for now we have to be patient. And I'm so grateful that each of you also accepted to be here with us virtually as well. I will now kindly ask my colleague Anna, who's been organizing all of this, like she's been leading the work at CFFP, to share some slides to visualize who we are as the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, and also what we believe what a feminist foreign policy is and what the summit season, as we call it, is. So we are the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. I'm Kristina, I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm extremely grateful to be doing this work of advocating for feminist foreign policy globally. This is us, this is the team. Here are a couple of pictures from different events we've been hosting over the past 3 years. Top right is actually an event we held at the Munich Security Conference. You can spot two of our panelists that we have here today as well, Sanam and Beatrice. It was the first ever event on feminist foreign policy at the Munich Security Conference. Thank you, Anna. Next one. And when we talk about a feminist foreign policy, what we mean is that we believe that the very paradigms of foreign and security policy need to be rethought, that we completely need to change them, that kind of this realist understanding and idea of foreign policy, which means that all states are in kind of some anarchy because there's no supranational government. So all states are fighting for power, and to increase one's power, you have to be more powerful than others. And you can achieve that by gaining military power. So our understanding of feminist foreign policy is to really rethink it and put people, human rights, feminist security at the core instead of militarized security. So it's like a huge undertaking to really look at all the different aspects of foreign and security policy, sit down, get the experts in as we did today, and think through how the practice of foreign policy has been in certain areas and what we believe will actually lead to safe people and human security globally. And because that's like a hell of a lot of topics, we decided to turn our summit, which should have taken place tomorrow, into a whole summit season. So we will have several events over the next couple of months, and then culminating in a summit in April, which will touch on those different aspects of foreign and security policy. On the next slide, please. So this is what we're doing. It's a Feminist Foreign Policy Summit, the first ever. As I said, today is the opening, and in April will be the big summit. And between today and April, we will have a couple of events. So tomorrow will actually be our first event. It will take place at the Canadian Embassy, also one of our partners, and it will be a closed-door session on women peace builders, understanding current challenges and opportunities to support. There will also be a live stream, and Anna will also share the link to still register for the event to watch the panel discussion tomorrow. In January, we will have a session co-hosted by our partner, the Open Society Foundation, on defending Afghan women's rights. In February, there will be an event, still to be announced the exact details, with our partner, the Swiss government. And in March, we will have a side event on making foreign policy feminist, hopes and demands by feminist civil society. Because as a feminist civil society organization ourselves, we believe that the demands by civil society, feminist civil society, human rights advocates need to be at the core of any feminist foreign policy. So this is our calendar of events. And in April then will take place the summit. And we are already so excited. So the summit on 13th of April, please everyone mark your calendars. We'll see again some of the most incredible speakers on the subject of different areas of feminist foreign policy. You can see some of them here. We're very lucky. We have a lot more already confirmed. And so the April summit will be just as fascinating as this evening's event, because as you have already spotted, we have a true all-star panel tonight with us, who I will introduce in a second as well. Yeah, and here are some of our partners. No, it's all of our partners, but we're still kind of gathering the club, and there will be more, but already confirmed some government partners, but also civil society partners. And we are very grateful we're doing this together, because also as a feminist organization, we believe that it's always collaboration over competition. So everything that we do, we pretty much do in partnership with others. Yep. So very excited about all of this. And now, because I'm sure you all do not just want to listen to me, because I actually have very fascinating people here who have a lot more interesting things to say. I have this most distinguished panel here with me. So whoever starts reading and writing about feminist foreign policy, you will come across all these people who are here on the screen now with me, because they are kind of the architects of feminist foreign policy and the different feminist foreign policies around the world. We have with me, and maybe each of you can briefly just wave when I say your name, Naraghi-Anderlini. Sanam is the director of the International Civil Society Action Network and the director of LSE's Center on Women, Peace and Security. Then we have Margot Wallstro, former Swedish minister, who introduced in 2014 feminist foreign policy in her country. Per, we were very lucky to already hear from you. Then Tekkal. Düsen is here in Berlin with, not in my office, but here in Berlin with me. Düsen is the founder of WAR.help, a civil society organization, and she's very likely Germany's most well-known human rights defender. And then we also have Beatrice Fihn. Beatrice is the director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for their work on the nuclear ban treaty. Thank you everyone so much for coming. What I will do now is I will pose a kind of a bit of a bigger question to each of you. So that will give each of you between 4 and 7 minutes to respond to it, like a short input. And then after we've kind of gone around and heard from each of you, and we will also have like a light conversation and then open for Q&A from the audience. Sanam, let me start with you. Sanam, you are one of the brains, the architects behind a very important UN Security Council resolution, that is UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which was the beginning of the Women, Peace and Security agenda at the UN. So this resolution has been, you respond to that, the hope of feminist civil society to bring feminist demands into the most powerful organ for security in the international system, the UN Security Council. Can you please kindly respond to whether feminist foreign policy equals women, peace and security, and what women, peace and security even is? And maybe what has been lost on the way where feminists brought their demands into the UN Security Council?
Thank you. That's first of all, it's lovely to be here with you. I'm sorry we're not all together. I hope that we can be in person. And I wanted to just say this conversation about feminist foreign policy, or the feminist lens on peace and security in the world, is really pressing. I mean, it's really timely now. When you think about the rise of extremist forces around the world, whether it's here in the United States where I am, or the kinds of things that we're seeing with the with the Taliban taking over in Afghanistan, Hindu nationalism. I mean, all these kind of weaponization of identity across transnational movements around the world, they all have misogyny as a common factor. They all believe in male supremacy and the suppression and oppression of women. So coming back with a feminist lens, or what it means to, from the standpoint of women's experiences, to talk about issues, I think is really important and frame it. Secondly, we're seeing a rise of authoritarianism. around the world as well. And again, that brings the question of what's our answer to that? If you're having another new Cold War with China and Russia and ramping up of military weapons and so forth, where do we stand? What's our answer to the problems, and what kind of solutions do we have? And I have a couple of thoughts on that one, but going back to your question, it's a big question. So, we have to put it in context. 21 years ago or 22 years ago, when we were sort of advocating for what became the WPS agenda, if you had gone to the Security Council talking about feminism, even if you talked about human rights and civil society, they were literally throwing us out the door. It was such a limited space for discussion. And I remember very clearly strategizing about this and saying, you know what, if we go in by saying, the nature of warfare has changed in the world. We're seeing civil wars. We're seeing wars that are occurring within the boundaries of states. So the UN system, the international system, isn't actually equipped to deal with those, right? It's because we're meant to believe in the sovereignty of states and non-interference. Those are principles of the UN system. How do we solve these problems? Bosnia, Rwanda, and so forth. And the message that we went into the council with was that actually on the ground in these countries, when wars emerge or when conflict emerges, you see a cohort of women who run to solve the problems, who are often the first ones to try and prevent, who are often the first ones who are trying to come up with solutions, doing the humanitarian work and so forth. And so women build peace. That was the message that we went into the council with. And I would say that if we bring it 21 years later and imagine if in the Afghan peace talks starting in 2012 in Doha, there had been a delegation of Afghan women present as an independent voice. Women, maybe they were a delegation that included judges and police officers and doctors and peace builders and human rights activists as their own voice in the context of the international conversations around Afghanistan, but also in engagement with the Taliban. Where would we be now in terms of the situation in Afghanistan? This is really important because this message right now is important in the case of Yemen. It's important in the case of Somalia and so forth and so on. The voice and presence of women from those communities, from the ground up, shaping their own future. And in a way, the simplest answer to your question about WPS versus feminist foreign policy is that WPS can be something that you can have as a foreign lens. So Sweden can have can embrace its interaction with the world using the women, peace and security agenda, and in a way, that's kind of taking a feminist foreign policy. But you can also be the government of Colombia or the government of Sri Lanka and say, I'm going to actually embrace this agenda for my own domestic space. And arguably here in the United States, I could be saying, we have a really serious gun problem. We have a really serious violence and kind of inequality problem. If you imagine bringing a women, peace and security lens to it, what would it be? So there's a domestic dimension. It's not just for people out there and we're okay at home. It's actually, there's a WPS is for us at home as well. The other thing that I would say is that it really, to me, and at least my area of work, it really is about saying the mentality that we go into negotiate or into interactions with those that we think are our adversaries is now, first, let's go to war. If we can't win by war, let's sanction them to death. And if we can't sanction them to death, then let's maybe sit down and talk to them. That needs to be flipped. And I think that when we look at it from a feminist lens, or certainly women in civil society, what we're saying is radical dialogue. Spend the time, spend the money talking to each other. We have to find the humanity. We have to find common grounds through dialogue. It's not going to come through bombing. I remember my Syrian partner saying to us many years ago, why is the world helping us kill each other? Why aren't they helping us talk to each other? Right. So this is difficult. It's not, I'm not saying this is easy, because this is saying that at the moment, whether we're dealing with the Taliban or whether you're dealing with the Houthis, or whether as a, with my Iranian background, if I'm thinking about the Iranian regime and so forth, it's not easy to sit and talk, right? We've been kind of imbued in this idea that, one side is good and one side is bad. When I look at it from the standpoint of civil society on the ground in Yemen and in Afghanistan and all these places, they turn around and say there are no good guys and there are no bad guys. Everybody is good and everybody's bad. All of them all of the violent actors, whether they are our own governments supplying the weapons, or whether it's the national government of a country, or whether it's the armed groups, all of them are targeting civilians. All of them are killing children. These are the things that we have to actually put on the table. And so again, for me, the flip and where the two forces, the feminist foreign policy and WPS come together, is actually saying, can we think about responsibility sharing? Can we think about what it means to be a powerful state, and your role is to actually take on the responsibility to protect civilians in your own country and elsewhere. Not responsibility to protect as the means to go to war, but as responsibility to protect as a means for ensuring peace. This is one thing. The second thing is that I think it's about looking at the world and thinking about it in terms of cooperation, not competition. Right? Why, we have ample resources for everybody to have food and so forth, and yet we're chasing and racing, and it's becoming an arms race, and it's becoming this kind of fractured world. How do we flip that? And then a third thing that I would put on the table is pluralism, because there is no longer any society in the world where you can say, we're all, Swedish born and bred from 1600s onwards, or British born and bred. I look at myself, I am British, I'm Iranian, I was married to an Italian, I live in America. You ask my children, what are they? They are everything. They are global citizens living wherever they are living. This is our society now, and we have to embrace that pluralism in our own context, because if we don't, those people that want to weaponize individual identity are doing it, and they are shredding us apart. So thinking about us as a global pluralistic world is, I think, a lens that we bring from, certainly from my feminism, I bring it, but it's something that I see over and over again in all of the places I work with, and in all of the partners that I work with on the ground, from Nigeria to Pakistan to, as I say, to Mexico to Indonesia. Women are looking at it and thinking about it from the human beings, the men and the women, the boys and the girls, not just from women's perspectives, but from men and women's perspectives, and saying, what is it that people need? And then taking that out and saying, where is our state, and is our state actually responsible? So it's kind of flipping a lot of these things. And I'll end by this. You said you guys question violent global systems of power. I wanted to say, imagine if we were thinking about peaceful global systems of responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanam. And I actually have a quick follow-up question. If you were able to respond to that in 1.5 minutes, that would be appreciated. Let's see. Sanam, you mentioned Afghanistan already, and your organization, International Civil Society Action Network. You've been working with women on the ground for so many years, and especially after the 15th of August, after the fall of Kabul, you have been so outspoken and angry, very angry on Twitter, rightly so, because of what happened. And at some point in mid-August, after the 15th, you tweeted something saying, oh, you international journalists and everyone, and governments, no governments, you're all now looking for Afghan women human rights defenders. We've been trying for you to listen to us for so many years. We've been trying to get these women, the Afghan women human rights defenders, into the negotiation, the talks, and you've been ignoring us. And now everyone is looking for them. And you were frankly pissed, right? And rightly so, because that is hypocritical what's been happening there. Can you give us a very tiny, small glimpse into how this exclusion practically has been happening, to better understand those systems of exclusion of certain voices?
Sure, I can talk about exclusion on multiple levels. As I said, number one, if they had been present in the talks over the years with the international community, engaging with the Taliban, etc., what issues would they have brought up? They would have brought up civilian protection. They would have questioned negotiations and conditionality. And when they were bombing clinics, women's clinics and schools, they would have questioned why it is that the negotiations are allowing the release of 5,000 Taliban, right? But they would have brought the human lens. And coming back to why I've been so angry and so upset about everything, is that my team, we are an organization of 12 people. We have 2,000 people depending on us to help them leave the country, who are in hiding, who are asking me and my team is a young team. I have 23-year-olds, 25-year-olds. They are at the receiving end of emails and texts every day from desperate people inside Afghanistan, desperate women who until 3 months ago were running the country, doing the peace building work, training security actors, being in the police force, who are now in hiding. And these people are coming to me and my team and asking for, how do we get out? What about our visas? I can't issue visas. Where we spent 2 years working on protection frameworks for women peace builders, which many governments, including my own, the British government, took to the Security Council and said, yes, we pledge support for women peace builders. Where is that support? Where are those visas? Why am I raising money, organizing flights, getting humanitarian access and sorting out things to get people out of the country? This is not the remit of my organization. I'm doing the job of governments. And so yes, I am angry about it because it's unfair to put a 23-year-old or a 25-year-old to be answering life and death questions and for us to be making life and death decisions for people. So that's one side of it. The other side of it, frankly, is that it's actually, we are denigrating ourselves. And I mean this in terms of all of our governments that stand for women's rights or rule of law or war issues around the International Criminal Court. When we send delegations, all male delegations to talk to the Taliban, we are disrespecting ourselves. Send an all-female delegation. Trust me, they will talk to you. Trust me, I know they will talk to you because they want to talk to the governments of this and that. Right? I've told my British government, I'm British, I speak Farsi. Why are we not part of the delegations? We know the religion, we know the culture. Why do we not use the assets that we have to engage and uphold our values, our own values, while at the same time responding to the needs and the voices and the concerns of Afghan women? Because the Taliban may represent some aspects of that society, but they certainly don't represent everything. And so we're putting our own credibility on the line. This to me is one of the most dangerous things, that we are, we can't say, oh, we believe in feminists, this, that, and the other, and then basically lock the doors and shut out people who are desperate and who have been at the forefront of peace building in their own countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanam. I'm sure when you were just recounting what's been happening, Dusan was likely thinking that is exactly the story, and that's been happening for her organization, like young people in the mid-20s responding to such emails. It's been exactly, I think, the same situation for Dusan and her organization, and I'll get back to that, Dusan, in a second when I have a couple of questions for you as well. Thank you, Sanam. So the Women, Peace and Security agenda that you talked about, Margot, if I recollect correctly, has been one of the basis of one of the key frameworks that were important when you in 2014 announced the feminist foreign policy in your country after you became foreign minister. You were the first person in the world on government level to do so. It was at a time when aggressions, like Russian aggression towards Baltic countries, increased, and many people were like, what the hell is she actually doing? Why is she doing that? It doesn't make sense. And there was like giggling all over the world, but you did it, and you've been proven everyone who was skeptical wrong. And I'd like to hear your story, how that came about.
Thank you very much, Kristina. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everything you're doing in following up on a feminist foreign policy around the world, and also organizing the first summit. And also thank you to Sanam and Dusan and Beatrice, and good to see Per again, because in your different contexts, you are carrying out a very important work for peace and democracy, because to me, this is the basis of it. This is what it is in the end. And of course, when I announced in 2014 that Sweden would pursue a feminist foreign policy, yeah, there was certainly a gasp and a visible sort of hesitation also from our own diplomats to begin with. And I will not deny that my own experience from having served for the United Nations as a special representative on conflict-related sexual violence was very much the background to this, and what brought me to try to translate that into a policy that would include women in everything from negotiations to signing peace deals to keeping peace in their countries, because I learned that more women means more peace, and also how absent women were and still are in the different peace processes around the world. So that's a big problem, and it's still a problem, as Sanam has explained, when it comes to Afghanistan, or look at any ongoing war or conflict. Where are the women? And this is what I did not have to force them, but this is what I made the diplomats and our ambassadors and our UN ambassador to constantly raise his hands in the meetings and ask, where are the women? Are they mentioned in the Security Council's resolutions? Are they there at the negotiating table? Are they part of any of these processes? Are they peacekeepers and police trying to keep peace around the world? Where are they? Are they decision makers? And also remember, and I think Sanam mentioned this, yesterday we had another report from IDEA, and they report on the state of democracy globally. And yesterday it became clear that more and more countries, including actually the United States of America, is now in the category where you can see that there is a decline of sort of the democratic system and structures that keep a democracy up. And more people are living in countries with a democratic backslide than in countries that are making progress. And this is, of course, very, very serious, because as we've heard already, many of these autocrats, the first thing they are doing is going after the rights of women. So this is why it is so important both for peace and democracy. And what I would add something, if I brought my experience as a special representative and the UN experience with me, and a deep understanding of what war does to women, war and conflict, what it does to women, what sexual violence as a weapon of war, what the kind of deep imprint that makes in any society, and how deep that goes, and how it is also transferred to sort of the next generation. I would say that I also quickly understood that this has to be translated into a practical policy, because we have to be credible, and that's why we also had to make sure that we were pursuing a feminist policy also domestically, but also that we had to use these parameters that I invented maybe or formulated, maybe because I'm fond of alliteration. So you need three things to be able to say, and it became, and I thought it through, that it's really about being represented. And it's also a matter of being there at the table, but first and foremost, it's about the rights, legal, human rights, and you have to ask those questions. Do women have a right to go to school? Do women have a right to open a bank account or run a business, or not to be married away when they are still 14 years of age? All of those things have to be checked. And then also the resources. What about gender budgeting, making sure that you can answer to the question, do the budget also correspond to meeting the needs of girls and women? So, and I think that as soon as we translated this into a practical policy, that everybody, all our diplomats could work with, and also when we collected the ideas from our embassies and our representation around the world, we had so much of positive response. It was amazing, I have to say, and it didn't take long. But you also have to make sure that this is something that will last, even if you change the government and change the political, there must be a structure that that exists also in the future. So to have a training, to make sure that there are action plans, that there is a sort of a deeper understanding in the organization is as crucial as only thinking of it as a motto for everything we do. And I think we have succeeded in doing that because we also listened to our seasoned diplomats that could contribute to those kinds of plans. So every year there were sort of different priorities. And of course, for example, sexual and reproductive health and rights became one of the priorities, or economic empowerment of women, or those sort of elements of a feminist foreign policy that meant a lot. So I think I'll stop with that. But this was the thinking from the very beginning, and I have been using the quote from Gandhi, you know, that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And this, I think, was also our experience with the feminist foreign policy.
Thank you so much, Margot. And sticking with the winning part, I'd like to move over to Per, and because many in the audience might know about it. So there's this wonderful documentary about you, Margot, and your work and implementing a feminist foreign policy. It's called The Feminist. Like, isn't that the best title ever someone invented? So The Feminist, and in The Feminist, what becomes clear is exactly what you just mentioned. Like, first the laughing, and the whole world is like, what the hell is happening? And then in 2016, Sweden decided to run for a non-permanent seat in the UN Security Council for 2017 and 2018. And around the world, there were like political commentaries where people were like, of course they're not gonna get it. Like, they just implemented a feminist foreign policy. Like, who do they think they are? That is so detached from reality, because the experience of more than half of the world has nothing to do with reality, right? So they're of course not gonna get the seat. But then what happened is you won the seat, and you were in the Security Council 2017, 2018. And Per, maybe you could give us like an insight, like a glimpse into what that has been like. What does it mean to have a feminist foreign policy country as a non-permanent member in the UN Security Council, and what is the implementation on the ground as an ambassador? What does it look like?
Thank you very much, Kristina, and I can verify that there was a lot of laughter, and as I said already in the beginning, I think our competitors were quite pleased when Margot launched the feminist foreign policy. But it all came down to really explaining what it means, and I think we got a lot of respect for our work, working very hard. And to give the example from the Security Council, it really means roll up your sleeves and do a lot of, you need boots on the ground. So we needed to make sure that the Secretariat included statistics on women and children. We needed to make sure that the Council in its deliberations also discussed what were the consequences for the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And I can tell you, in the first year, 2017, there wasn't a single resolution or presidential statement without reference to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So very successful. But you also need to make sure that women are represented. So we made sure that we always invited female briefers, many from women's civil society organizations. I think the very first meeting where we had a gender balance when it comes to briefers on the Security Council was in the summer of 2018. And I think, Margot, you also were in charge of a visit to the Sahel, or there was a visit to the Sahel, which led to the first high-level meeting on a geographic conflict with a focus on women, peace and security, also in 2018. But to make the Secretariat report on statistics, you also need the UN missions, of course, on the ground to provide that information. So we also had direct contacts with those missions, quite often human rights reporters or the like. So I think we made a big impression. We changed the way the Security Council dealt with these issues on the ground in the particular conflict situation. And we were very happy to note that Germany basically took over this work when we left the council at the end of 2018. Germany took over and without calling it a feminist policy, basically conducted a feminist foreign policy on the Security Council. But I think so this is limited to the work on the council, which is of course important. But you also have to walk the talk when it comes to how you present yourselves. So we early initiated a group of friends to boycott all male panels in the whole UN. We made sure that all the men in the UN mission committed to the UN Women Initiative He for She, which we helped launch in, I think it was the end of 2014. We also, of course, as Margot said, very active in the third committee when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights and human rights in general. So you really have to walk the talk. And I can report that this year we have reached 50% women ambassadors, which I think is a very good sign. And I think the tendency is rising. So in 10 years, I think there will be a clear majority of women ambassadors. And you really have to realize it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. You get better decisions when you base them on a feminist foreign policy than you would otherwise.
Can I add something, Kristina? Because I think that we all think a lot about how to measure success. And I mean, this was also necessary when it came to using something, a concept like a feminist foreign policy. So how do you list the successes, as Per just did with the things that happened in the Security Council? And to write reports and follow up, and as we have to report also to the Parliament, of course, the Swedish Parliament, very, very important to list the things that has happened, and at the same time try to measure or to describe some of these processes. But sometimes, as with sexual violence, it can be kind of success can also mean that the figures look exactly the opposite that you would like. If more women report violence or sexual violence or rapes, it means that they trust that the system will actually do something to help them, to assist them. So the statistics might show a raise in the number of rapes, for example, but one should look at it as a success if it means in the end that they trust the system to deal with it. So I think that this is something we have to reflect on. If you want to pursue a feminist foreign policy, decide also how to measure practically and in a way to report this, how to put it on paper and how to measure things. So, and I think that we have another challenge also for the years to come that have to do with inclusion, because we've learned so much from the debate over the last few years, that inclusion also has to be much more of again, a measurable element in feminist foreign policy.
Thank you, Margot, and thank you, Per. And speaking about success and what a successful feminist foreign policy would be, I think Beatrice has her very own thoughts on that. Beatrice is a strong critic of the current international political system. And when I say critic, I mean it as like the biggest compliment. We need people to criticize the status quo, right? That's the only way we can improve the society. And Beatrice, you with your organization, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, what you've really been doing is you were like, okay, like the current system that is based on the idea of military might and nuclear deterrence, and the ones who have the kind of the biggest possibility to destroy others are the most powerful ones. You were like, no, like that doesn't make sense and it shouldn't be like that. So you gathered a group of countries to initiate conversations about the nuclear ban treaty, and you gathered so many countries and signatures that it actually became international law earlier this year. And you're doing this, but I'll let you explain in a second, because you're really looking at the roots of the international political system, which is patriarchal, like this dominant, this violent understanding, and hence to kind of smash that patriarchal aspect and dismantle the patriarchal aspect, you start with disarmament. Can you explain that to us, how that is linked, Beatrice? But yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kristina, and thank you to the Swedish Embassy for hosting this. And it's really, really an honor to be here. I wish I was in Berlin, of course. It would have been so nice to do it in person, but also very excited to have a wider audience for this through our online event. Yeah, I mean, to me, I think disarmament is like inherently a feminist kind of strategy. And I think it's really important that we look at that as connected. Very often, weapons issues, and particularly nuclear weapons, but also other weapons, it seems to be almost this kind of isolated issue in the international context, when it's so related to human rights, gender equality, development, and we really have to look at it in context with each other. I think there's many reasons why we need to have a gender lens on disarmament issues. First, of course, just the women need to be a part of the decision making around weapons, and we've seen from the top heads of state down to the military who uses the weapon, parliamentarians, experts who are the journalists who report on this. It's very male dominated. Everything that's about weapons is very male dominated, and that's of course an issue of representation that we need to fix. And then I think it's also really important to consistently, when we talk about different weapons, including nuclear weapons, is to look at the different types of impact that weapons have on different groups, including women. On nuclear weapons, for example, evidence from Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and all the nuclear weapons test sites saw very specific consequences for women. Of course, a nuclear bomb wipes out everyone, right? Regardless of gender in that area. But for the survivors and for the communities and for the environment, it has long-term impact that is very different and need to be a part of the conversations when we have policy. For example, women have more soft tissue, so take up more radiation. Meaning that women develop more cancers and diseases afterwards, including things like miscarriages, stillborn babies that we saw in the Pacific after nuclear testing, these kind of jelly babies, and other horrible consequences. You had in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japanese culture was very patriarchal. Women who were embarrassed to say that they were from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were not, they were seen as dirty, for example. No man wanted to marry a young woman who was from Hiroshima in the 60s, for example, in the 50s, because she might be tainted, right? And poisonous, and might not be able to have babies in the same way. So I think that we have to, and you look at other weapons, like landmines, small arms, cluster bombs. I mean, they all have these different impact for women and men in the long-term and short-term perspective. And that has to be a part of the policy conversation. But the third thing that I think is really why we need a feminist foreign policy, or feminist kind of perspective on disarmament issue, and why disarmament needs to be a strong part of feminist foreign policy, is really this sort of idea of gender, right? And masculinities and femininities. And I think that this is where, I think we have a lot of, we've done a lot of work on representation. I think that's great. We talk a lot about it, this sort of impact, which is good. And I think the thing that we need to really tackle now head on is this idea of masculinity and femininity, what is strong, what is rational, our perception. And when I say our, I don't mean probably this audience and us here, but sort of governments, politicians, political decision makers, media, they have a very skewed way, a skewed sort of impression of what is strong and rational. And almost nowhere else is it so obvious as with nuclear weapons. This kind of idea that being prepared to end pretty much all of humanity as we know it, as a way to protect myself, is somehow seen as rational, where it's completely illogical and irrational and extremely emotional. It's not really fact-based or scientifically driven. It's just a very emotional, if I don't get what I want, I will destroy all of us. Come at me. Like this kind of, really, really bizarre way of looking at it. And in fact, just looking at the conversations now on the German coalition negotiations, and this idea that you have the Green Party, you have the Social Democratic Party, you have the Liberal Party, might be making some moves on the nuclear weapons issue in the coalition right now. And I just read like 2 days ago, this big article in The Economist about Germany's kind of decision on nukes. And the headline is Germany going soft on nukes? And to me, it was just like, obviously, it's like, what is going soft? I mean, what are we actually talking about? And Carol Cohn is doing amazing work, if you haven't read her, on nuclear weapons and masculinities. We've always framed disarmament as soft, naive, and weak. And of course, that means that armament, more weapons, is hard, strong, rational. And to me, that's really the main obstacle to process on peace, on development, on justice, equality, because if we keep thinking that disarmament is weak and armament is strong, even though when we look at sort of the facts and the evidence and the research on this, we know that war and weapons do not create protection. And Afghanistan is one of those perfect examples, right? 20 years of just pouring in money and weapons and military. And did it create protection? Did it keep people safe? Absolutely not. And how can we still see that as rational and strong? And we see education, human rights, development, less weapons in circulation as naive, weak, even though, again, science and evidence and research show that it makes people more safe. Communities with less weapons and more investment in healthcare, development, education are safer, yet somehow that's weak and naive. And it's like, as I said, like that, just that framing is so incredibly emotional and is very kind of irrational and problematic. And I think that nuclear weapons is just a very kind of fundamental part of that, and like almost at the center, because there's no other kind of such strong symbol for this kind of massive destructive power and kind of oppression and willingness to destroy everything to get what you want, even though you don't even win that yourself, right? Like there's no winning in nuclear war. So I think that that's, it's something that we need to talk more about. And I think that the feminist foreign policy is really a perfect example of how we can talk about that and how we can bring this up. But I think that we have to go much further than just the representation and the kind of specific impact on women, and really kind of start challenging these very fundamental and very skewed perspectives that we have, and what is strength, and how come we see peace, like negotiations and compromise, as weak, and force and use of lots of weapons as less worth or not so attractive. And to me, that's really something that you can also see from, from small things in society up to the kind of global UN Security Council kind of conversations, and everywhere in between, that sense of what is rational and strong and what is weak and naive. And I think we need to challenge that much more.
100%. Challenging that has the power to really transform the international system, because those like patriarchal stereotypes lie at the core of it, right? And it has kind of put ideas into people and everything into boxes, and like keeps every one of us unfree. In a second, after talking, like getting Düsen in, I would like to get back to you, Beatrice, and talk about like kind of your demands with regards to government and the work with governments. And but sticking to the aspect you just mentioned about human rights being associated as something weak, when I actually look at Düsen, who just left. Okay, wait, hi. Okay, cool. Like the idea that human rights is understood as something weak, but then I look at my friend Düsen, who, as I said before, is one of the most accomplished human rights defenders here in Germany, recently also awarded the Bundesverdienstkreuz, didn't look up that translation, but one of the highest honor of the state of the state of Germany. And Düsen, your work on defending human rights, that started with the tragedy of the genocide against your people, the Yazidi people. And you've been a war reporter, you've been traveling to the country, you've been doing documentaries. You are the reason why people in Germany, but also globally, know so much about it, next to people you're fighting with, like Nadia Murad, Amal Clooney, and others. But you're one of the faces who brings attention to the subject. So there's literally nothing weak or naive or anything about the incredibly hard work that you've been doing. Düsen, can you please comment on why human rights and work such as that you do need to lie at the heart of all foreign policy decisions?
First of all, dear Kristina, thank you so much for your kind words, and to the colleagues for your deep and insightful speeches. So thank you to CFFP and especially Kristina for having me, and thank you to the Swedish ambassador for giving this topic the stage it deserves. I'm a human rights activist. I became a human rights activist. First of all, before this strategy, I was a journalist, and also became a founder of WAR.help, a human rights organization founded on the ashes out of genocide. I founded WAR.help in 2015 in response to an ongoing genocide committed by ISIS against my own religious community, the Yazidis, in hopes giving women a platform to have their voices heard. So today, WAR.help stands for women's rights regardless of their religion, race, or ethnicity. And in 2015, when I went to Iraq to report what was happening, and when I arrived there, I saw lots of men who were speaking not only for the thousands of women who had been captured by ISIS, but for my entire community. Oriental patriarchal systems make it very difficult for women who are trying to have a seat at the table, who wants to become agents of change. When I founded WAR.help, the patriarchal structures told me, you can't speak for the Yazidis, even though I was one. They told me, you are the wrong Yazidi. You are not an Iraqi, you are a German, you are too modern, you are too liberal. I experienced this time and time again. Even now, I hear them when I stand up for women in Afghanistan. They tell me, you can't speak for Afghani women. You are not a Muslim, you are not an Afghan. Over the last 6 years, I've learned that all that is a tactic. A tactic from people, often, not always, but often men who want to hold on to power. That is why it's incredibly important that formats such as this one exist to counter these forces which are continually trying to suppress our work. Women's rights are human rights, and a feminist foreign policy should be something that every person can support. And the Taliban takeover on the 6th August was a déjà vu to us at WAR.help as founders of this organization out of the ashes of genocide. It was the same feeling. It was like a déjà vu, and what's very challenging for the people who are working for us, it was the same as Sanam told us. We had the same experience here. And yeah, bearded men with guns on pickup trucks that roll into towns. We had already seen that when ISIS swept through the Nineveh plains in Iraq, which marked the onset of the genocide against the Yazidis. Of course, there's a difference. The Taliban weren't inclined to conduct a full-scale genocide. Yet they installed a brutal regime which deprives women of their basic rights and imposes strict rules on everyday lives. We immediately knew the implications of the takeover. It was then we started together with CFFP and Kristina Lunz the campaigning. We teamed up with the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy and initiated Defend Afghan Women's Rights. In just 2 weeks' time, we were able to raise 160,000 euros in funds to support human rights organizations on the ground and help with evacuating people and that were under immediate threat of the Taliban rule, like female lawyers, women rights activists and female journalists who feared for their lives and wanted to leave the country. Since August, we have been receiving countless messages and emails by people who had to go into hiding and were trying to leave the country. One of our other partner organizations, Wellness Worldwide, confirmed to us that they were able to feed 2,000 people with the help of the funds collected through Defend Afghan Women's Right. It is times like these in which civil society is put to the test. We are thankful that we were able to provide effective humanitarian aid on the ground and grant people safe passage to other countries. But there is still a lot of work to do. Tens of thousands of people remain under threat of the Taliban rule. Just yesterday, I received a call for help by a young girl whose father was abducted by the Taliban. They took ransom of $350,000 and sent the father's dead body to the family. She wrote me, "This is the true face of Taliban." Despite how they present themselves to Western media and diplomacy, we must not forget that the Taliban are committing outrageous crimes, right under the nose of the international community. This is why we can't stay silent. And this, I think, is the most important reason why we have to speak up and why we have to make it possible that, for example, women who were in the hands of ISIS as slaves, getting used and raped, stand up and say by themselves, we are not victims anymore. We call ourselves survivors. We are survivors. And I think that was a very new thing also in our religion. And I would say we have a lot of genocides who are happening, unfortunately, in the 21st century. But the fact that the world has known what is happening to my people was ISIS survivors like Nadia Murad, and we have many Nadia Murads. And what I find very important is how to help women who were in the hands of ISIS, for example, but in many other ways as well, in Afghanistan, Iran, wherever, how to make it possible that they can go on. Because of course we know that there are a lot of challenges, especially in our own culture, the way how we were born and raised, how we grow up with this, kind of being threatened in a way. So I think women who wants to be heard, women who wants to be part of solution and actors or agents of change have many enemies, even in their own community. Maybe this is the most difficult thing to go on. So when I look at my experience, we was born and raised here. I founded out the NGO together with my sisters, and no one was waiting for the new girls on the block, even not parts of my own religion, not the traditional ones. So it was always like, no, we have to say what is going on. You could stay as victims, no problem. But if you want to be part of power, then it became more and more dangerous. For example, when I went to Iraq, but not just in Iraq, even in Europe, at the EU, when we were at the Sakharov Prize, when Nadia Murad get honored, people came to me, even from my own community, and said, you are not allowed to be here and to stay here and to speak here. And I began to cry, and the people thought I cried because of the genocide, but I cried because of many ways. And that was a feeling which I knew. And I think it's so important to speak that out, to say it's enough, stop. And I know every one of us could tell stories like that. And what we try to do is to go forward. And I think this kind of allyship, for example, which Kristina, Lunz, CFFP, WAR.help, and we had done the last months, for example, could be a good symbol for that. So we don't have to fight every one of us by ourselves. It is all about collaboration. And maybe this is one of our biggest challenges, because we was born in a system which wants to make us know that we have to do it by our own, that we have a lot of enemies, that collaborations are not good and things like that. And I think we need a new way of culture in that cases. So it's not about competition, it's about collaboration, as you said. And therefore, I think it's just the beginning, and we have to go on together. And this is the main reason why I'm here today with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dusan. And kind of the patriarchal weight that you just described, right, with all the work that you've been doing, and you as a public person here in Germany, and all the attacks and threats and online violence that you constantly receive, which has become like such an unfortunate part of your daily life, that is the result of this patriarchal system that's been created over the past 4,000 to 6,000 years, that does not allow for women, for feminist thoughts, for those challenging that very power dynamics in our society, to speak up. So I'm personally, I'm hugely grateful for the work that you're doing. On Thursday this week, you're hosting a conference on Afghanistan as well, with the motto, "We see you," right? Like to make sure that the what's happening in Afghanistan stays in the spotlight. So I'm very much looking forward to this. Thank you. So we have roughly 15-20 minutes left for this. So everyone who in a bit during the Q&A would like to ask questions, please get your fingers ready, type down the questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. But before we do that, because there already are a few questions, what I'd like to do now, so we've heard the different demands, we have gotten a small glimpse into what feminist foreign policy means, like the different aspects. We heard about peace building, about money allocation, about disarmament, about mediation, about humanitarian aid. And we have civil society representatives here, academia, but also government. And now I'd like to hear with the different actors here having such different demands, and not such different, but so many demands. And especially with civil society and feminist civil society always being so radical, right? It's our job. We have to demand the max to get at least something. I'd like now to understand how we can actually make that collaboration happen, because also from us as CFFP or ICANN, there has been and there will be criticism even towards countries that have a feminist civil society, a feminist foreign policy, because we want to keep pushing them, right? Because we want to achieve more. But then there are governments like Sweden, for example, that might say, in general, I agree with disarmament, but we also are part of a system that's been created over so many years, so we can't change overnight. I'd like to understand now how we together, as individuals, government, civil society, academia, who believe in this feminist vision, how we can actually push forward in collaboration, whilst demanding the max, but not calling each other out or any like that. Beatrice, how can we manage that? You've been an outspoken critic, so important. That is why you changed international law. But yeah, how are we doing that together?
Well, I think bold change is really, I mean, it becomes easy to criticize it. And like you mentioned, like for an individual as well, like Dusan, for example, receiving online hate and abuse. And if you are outspoken, it's scary. And I think that that's the same thing for governments as well. So I think we need to recognize that bold change is both scary, but it's also extremely effective. And one of the things that I think is, I mean, I think looking at, I'm Swedish, so seeing the Swedish government and under the leadership of Margot Wallstro adopt a feminist foreign policy and go kind of bold on that and declare we're going to do this, and the reaction that also gave Sweden a massive amount of power and influence, and seeing other governments follow, and like everyone's like, what is happening over there? And even the people who laughed at that maybe or said, oh, that's crazy, or don't do that, can't get sucked into it. There's a power in doing things and doing very progressive things. And the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons is the same thing. We were also, and I think that the whole first they laugh at us and then they ignore us and all those things, it matches with my experience as well, that there's an incredible power and agency in doing stuff and doing quite kind of forward-looking and fast and aggressive, but not in the masculine toxic way, but in a nice way. Like the kind of like sort of taking charge of a situation and move forward quickly, bring allies together, and also kind of creating a sense of control over a situation, that, you know, we don't have to wait for other people to agree with us. We don't have to always wait for the slowest, because in the international community, the slowest are so slow, and they're not even slow, they're going backwards. And if we wait for everyone to get on board from the beginning, we will wait forever. So I think that there's, I think you can see that in particular for small NGOs that lack funding, or for smaller countries that are not, you know, the P5 in the Security Council, for example, there's no power in being in the middle and just kind of being average and following what everyone is doing. Then you get no influence and you don't shape anything. There's power in being at the forefront and driving things, and it's scary. It's scary for institutions, it's scary for individuals. You are risking your reputation, maybe, you're kind of feeling exposed, but that's also where the enormous benefits and the impact lies. And to daring to do that, and I think that for me, also kind of reasoning with that is this idea of daring to do that as an individual, as an institution, as a sort of a political movement, as a government, in all those levels, to really like lean into the radical a little bit, because how else are we ever going to change things? I know that change takes time. And we can see that on the feminist issue. Like when I started in this field, you know, I started in this work on nuclear weapons with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We talked about a gender perspective on nuclear weapons a long, long time ago, and like nobody recognizes. Everyone thought that it was absolutely, you know, those things have nothing to do with each other. Not even feminism in security issues or feminist foreign policy was, and that's only like 15 years. So we've made massive progress. I know that progress is slow, but I think that if you want progress to happen at all, and if you want these other people to get dragged along after you, you have to be out there. You have to be very, you know, forward-looking and dare to stand up for what's right and dare to be a bit radical.
Sanam, you want to add to that? You raised your hand. Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you. A couple of things that I wanted to add. Number one, I've been doing this work and working all around the world in war zones and with people living in war zones for over 25 years. And one of the things that I keep saying, and often, you know, we get criticized, are you being essentialist? Are you being this, you know, sort of, you know, taking sort of women as if it's a soft issue, is when I say that, you know, we see women and we see when wars break out, there's a certain cohort that run to become peacemakers and peace builders. And that takes incredible strength and courage, and they're risking their lives. But what's interesting is that there is an underlying perception in all of the discourse that we have that goes back to Hobbes practically, right? Which is that human nature in and of itself is violent. I actually challenge that perception entirely. Are we capable of violence? Yes. Is it our natural state? No. Even in war zones, even on the worst circumstances, you see a tiny minority that are being violent, a tiny minority that are often exploited and manipulated by an even tinier minority who are the beneficiaries of the violence, right? So you get a bunch of guys, whether it's the weapons sellers, whether it's the narco-criminal traffickers, whether it's the psychopathic autocrats or the politicians or whatever, who basically manipulate often young men into doing the violence, right? And kind of enabling that giving them guns, giving them brainwashing effectively. And this is, I did research in 10 countries on looking at young men and violence. And it's fascinating actually when you go talk to them, when you talk to gangs, when you talk to militias and so forth, and you ask them from a human level what's going on. But it's a tiny minority that's benefiting from the violence that is getting another small minority involved in the actual violence. The vast majority of the public is trying to live. The vast majority of the public is trying to cope, whether it's in a refugee camp, whether it's in the middle of the impact, you know, ISIS taking over Iraq or Afghanistan right now. Ordinary people try to cooperate and collaborate and help each other. We see the best of humanity coming out at the worst times also. And what's interesting for me is that throughout history, that's never been documented. Even now, even in 25 years of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, the amount of documentation we have of how women have engaged and what agency they've used to look after, to do humanitarian work, to mitigate conflict, to engage in peace mediation at a local level, at an international level, that documentation is far, far less than the documentation of the violence against women or our knowledge of the violent actors. We take it for granted. We take peacemaking and peace for granted. And we can't do that anymore because social cohesion and peace globally is going down. So we have to elevate and say, how are people handling this? How is it possible to be living in under the most difficult circumstances and not use violence? And what the question then becomes, actually, there are literally a handful of companies that benefit from violence, from selling their weapons. Beatrice knows very well, because that's the work that you guys do. But when you look at it, when you bring it out and you look at how you have leaders, maybe, and I was talking to a colleague of mine yesterday, Kathleen Kunis, and we were saying, well, maybe it's violence is actually a mental illness. Maybe these, bullying and being sort of oppressive is the minority. And somehow we've enabled that to capture the kind of space and become the normative narrative for the majority. It's not. And so let's flip it around. Let's look at the world from the standpoint of women and others. And I add men into this because when we say patriarchy, for me, I think about my father, I think about my grandfather, I think about the really, really good men in my life. And I think how many of them subscribe to the notion of toxic masculinity, right? They actually don't benefit either. And I'll end with this. Some years ago, my nephew was asking me about feminism and, he was, are you a feminist and so forth. And we went down the path of what is feminism and equality. And finally I said to him, look, if I was only working for equality, the danger could be that I would be working for equality into the status quo. So we want women to have equal opportunity as men to go to war, to kill, to maim, to die, right? What we're fighting for is for men, neither women nor men, to have to face that form of violence. It's equality, but it's transformative equality. And that to me is the essence of where we are. And that's why we need more men in these conversations, because it's not just about us for us. It's actually us for them, for the majority of them. And you can take that to different levels. You can take that into the Me Too world of, how many Harvey Weinsteins are there and how many are there men that are actually also bullied by those guys? So it's shifting those narratives and saying what we're talking about is good for everybody. And all the women peace builders I work with always talk about the men, always talk about their boys, always talk about what's happening in their communities around them. Not many men do that. And that's one of the reasons why we really need the women at the table, because they bring that human lens and they bring everybody's perspective and care into the mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanam. Margot, you raise your hand, and do you also want to comment on how much pushing do you need from feminist civil society? You're still muted, Margot. Thank you.
Right. All right. So the advantage of sticking your neck out and pronouncing a feminist foreign policy was that you are also given a chance to actually define what is feminism, because you will get that question and you have to sort of settle that to begin with. But to me, I have to admit, it had to be practical. It had to be, it had to include change that could be visible, something that all our diplomats could actually do. And so I didn't ask everybody to suddenly embrace or declare that they are feminists. I think that would never have worked in foreign policy and in the ministry. So I think it's about, and I've been in politics for many, many years now, and I've learned the following. You need courage, and you need patience as well. And I've been telling young diplomats the same thing. You have to be equipped with a certain courage and be able to demonstrate courage and act in a courageous way, but you also sometimes need to use your patience. And I think our ambassador, Pat, he set it out to begin with. What are the elements of this policy to be successful? Well, you need leadership, you need ownership, you need the steering, and you need support. And I really think that leadership today is about daring to take certain steps, to be the first to declare something like this. You cannot be afraid of leading a new movement or organizing something that has never been done before. So I think that was part of it. But then you have to be very practical in showing why this is important. And I think we have even figures and statistics enough to say that this is, as Per said, not only the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. Because peace agreements where women are among the signatures, they last longer. It means more peace. And I think that these are the facts that we have to deliver. And I even go as far as saying that it's not that women are in general better than men, but women come with as much as we would like to think so. But the thing is, we bring our experiences, our views, our knowledge to the table. And very often, for example, in peace days, it means that there are more options on the table. There is a different perspective on the table, because we also need men to pursue a feminist foreign policy. And so I think that it has to be both practical, but also provide the vision and the dream of something different. And you have to establish an agenda. I've done that in every time I've had a new post, I set my own agenda. And it has to be bold, otherwise you will not change the world. You will not change anything. So you need both the courage and the patience. It sounds better in Swedish. It's mod och tålamod. And I think that this is also the thing with the feminist foreign policy. You need both.
Absolutely. And okay, so what happened now is that we only have 2 minutes left. Sorry, but so this has been fantastic. There's only one thing which I failed, and that is the Q&A session. And I am genuinely sorry to the audience for that. But I guess that just happens if you literally have the most prolific speakers in one panel, like the people we have here, like all of you in one place with the ridiculously busy schedules that all of you have. That is just kind of a little world wonder. So thank you so much again for actually being here, and sorry to the audience. I know I failed on this, but we just have like the most incredible expertise here. But I'd like, before I do the proper bye-bye, I'd like for Per and Dusan, maybe like 30 seconds each of your final remarks on the importance of bringing that human rights focused feminist lens into foreign policy going forward.
Well, I think, thank you, Kristina. I think you've already noticed that I'm quite convinced that this is the path we need to continue on. And I see three groups that we need to work on together: governments and civil society. The first would be the sort of anti-gender movement. I mean, there is a movement, like you said, Beatrice, even in the European Union, where people don't want to stand up to previous commitments. So those we need to take on firmly. Then there is a large group of the non-convinced, sort of the movable middle. And there we need to work with good examples, concrete examples, locally adjusted arguments, and try and convince these countries or groups that feminist foreign policy is the right thing to do. And third, I totally agree with Sanam that we need to engage men more as sort of people pushing for the feminist agenda. Men and boys need to be engaged much more. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love that. Susan.
My hope is other governments and institutions will have the same courage to think outside established funding structures and fund many more women-led NGOs who are working on the ground. And I think what is very important also for the agents of change is that passion and purpose are stronger than fear. So fear is no option. This is the individual thing, but in another way, of course, you need healthy structures to make it possible that NGOs who haven't got so much connections, for example, who are in the beginning, could become a best practice example that needs the power of allyship. And of course, we need men and women, and we need it in an international way. So this kind of inclusion was something what I find very important in that case, that also the people from the regions know exactly what they need.
Thank you, Susan. And on that note, speaking of allyship, my colleague Anna will be so kind and put in the chat kind of the link to, if you want to become a member of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, if you like that, and especially if you want to stay in touch with what's ahead with the next sessions over the next couple of months, and then April, the summit taking place at the Canadian and Swedish embassies here in Berlin. You'll all get invites. You're now on our lists. There's no hiding anymore. Thank you so much, Margot and Per and Beatrice, Sanam, Susan, but also and especially Ulrika and Anna in the background who organized all of that. Huge thank you. We so much appreciate the work that all of you here in front of me have been doing for decades. Like, we are a new kind of organization on the field, but you've been doing that for decades, and we're standing on your shoulders, and we couldn't be doing what we're doing without you. Thank you so much. You'll be involved in the summit season going forward, and we're grateful for that. And yeah, wishing everyone a lovely evening. Thank you, everyone.